Hello, Julie here and welcome to my YouTube channel. The layout that I'm going to share with you today is for the challenge over at Off The Rails Scrapbooking for April this year 2021. This is the mood board that they've supplied and the challenge is to include sewing on your page. I usually use my sewing machine for any stitching that I do on my layouts, but this time I decided to do hand stitching. As you can see, my photos are of some dolphins, so I wanted to have some waves. I used this design cut with a view paper from a pad called Get It Girl, and I've used my scan and cut to cut some rows of waves. I'm going to use these at the bottom of my layout. Now I cut 4 rows, but when I looked at the pattern that I'd cut, when I look at the negative part of it, they too are waves, so I end up with 8 rows of waves. If you own a scan and cut, you'll find this cut file in the borders sections of Canvas Workspace. Using my Versacolor black ink cube, I go ahead and ink the 2 short sides and the wavy edge of each one of these wave cuts. I find that this will help it stand out from each other once I layer them on top of each other. I cut a piece of the same pattern paper that is 3 inches by 11 3/8 inches, which is the same length as the waves, and I'm going to use that as a background for my waves so that you can't see the background paper through the waves. I'm going to just use my art glitter glue to attach those waves to my backing piece. I'm going to start at the top and work my way down so that the waves sit on top of each other. I'm alternating them so that there's 2 different styles of waves here, so that each style is on top of the previous one and they don't line up exactly. Originally I had planned to use this green as my background because of the colour of the water in the photos, but I wasn't all that keen on it when I got around to it, so I changed my mind. I decided to go for a white background, but I wanted this grey to be a frame around my outside of my page, so I got this piece of pattern paper from another Design Cuts with a View pad called Fairytale Florals, and I cut that so that it had it was a 1 inch frame. And then I cut my piece of white cardstock down to 11 3/8 by 11 3/8 to create my frame for my layout. So this is basically what I have in mind at this point in time. I used the same black ink cube to ink around the edge of both the white and the grey frame that I've cut out. I attached the white cardstock on top of my grey frame using double-sided tape. Because the frame is fairly flimsy, I didn't want to use glue and risk that it would buckle. Now it's time to make the holes to do the hand stitching. I'm going to use my T-ruler to draw a straight line 1/4 inch in on the white section of the cardstock. I'm using my T-ruler so that I get a nice straight line. It's made by Westcott. I have put a mark on the page where the waves come up to because I won't be bothering to stitch underneath that section. To make my holes, I'm going to use this old stubby holder that I've cut open and my paper piercer and a ruler that's got holes punched in it every 1/2 inch. It's called a Zero Hero centering ruler and it's made by the See-Through Ruler Company. So this has got, it's actually a centering ruler, that's what I bought it for, but it does happen to have 1/2 inch holes on the other side, so I don't want 1/2 inch holes, I want 1/4 inch, so I'm going to punch first of all with the 1/2 inch and then I'm going to move it up 1/4 inch and punch again. So each hole will be 1/4 inch apart and it will be punched along that 1/4 inch line that I drew using my T-square. Makes it a lot easier to stitch if you have holes in your cardboard, especially when you're using floss, if you're using a blunt needle, which I will be, so that I can fit all the floss through the eye of the needle. So I do that around 3 edges of my layout, and then I use my eraser and erase the pencil lines before I do my stitching, because I don't want that pencil line to show out at all. To do the stitching, I'm using embroidery floss. I'm using 2 strands of the dark green, which matches the colour of the water. I'm using 2 strands of grey that match the background, and 2 strands of white to go with the white background. I didn't want a thin, barely seeable border, so that's why I went with the 6 strands. I'm doing a standard back stitch, and I'm securing my edges with normal, my ends with normal sticking tape. So I just pull the needle through, hold my thumb on the thread, and then use my sticky tape to hold that in place before I start to do the stitching. If you haven't done any hand stitching before and you're unsure of how to do it, there are lots of YouTube clips on how to do a back stitch. You go forward 1 and then back 1 and go back over each time. So yes, plenty of videos on how to do that. So I'm going to do the rest of this hand stitching off camera, and I'll get back to you when it's finished. So here we are, all done. Actually, it didn't take me as long as I thought it would. It is quite easy once you get started. So if you haven't done it before, don't be scared to give it a try. I want the waves to sit a little proud of the page, because I'm going to tuck one of the photos behind it. Well, that's the plan. So I'm using my art glitter glue to attach a piece of scrap chipboard to the back of the wavy section, and then I'm going to use the same glue to attach that to my layout. To mat my photos, I used the piece of pattern paper that I cut out from the middle of the outside frame of my layout. I cut the photo mats so that they were 1/4 of an inch wider and 1/4 of an inch deeper in total than my photos, so that I ended up with an 1/8 of an inch border all around each photo. Then I took an emery board and filed around each edge of the photo. This sort of peels the colour off of the photo and leaves a fine white border. I generally do this on the edge of my mat or on the edge of my desk, but I'm just doing it here like this to show you how I do it. Once I'd filed around each edge of both of the photos, I inked around the edges of the photo mats and then attached my photos to the mat. I wanted to put my journaling in circles so they looked like bubbles, so I printed them out on a piece of white cardstock so I could get the spacing correct. Then I printed them on some of the same paper that I used to cut my waves out of. Then I used my Spellbinders standard circles, small, to cut them out, so I end up with 3 circles that have got my journaling on them that are the same paper as I've used for the waves. Now I'm going to also do some hand stitching around the edge of these, so I use the same procedure. I punch holes using my paper piercer, and these are not necessarily 1/4 of an inch apart, but I try and get them as even as I can. And when I die cut it, the die actually puts a little bit of an imprint around the inside of the circle, so I try to follow that line. Anyway, I put all those holes in there, and then I decided to just use two threads of the green, the dark green, to stitch around the edge, because the paper was pretty thin and close to the edge, and I didn't want to run the risk of tearing the circles. Once I've got that done, I have a bit of a play around with how I want the layout to look, but it doesn't end up looking like this anyway. I change it again. My journaling says Whyalla, the 15th of January 2012, on Pamela and Peter's boat, Nanny, Poppy and Charlie. For my title, I used the background paper, so the piece that I had left after I cut the middle out of the frame, and once again I used my scan and cut, and the font that I used was Cairo, and I cut out the title, which is Feeding the Dolphins. I'm going to ink around the edge of this and then use my T-ruler to make sure I get it straight and attach this using glue to the top of my layout. Next step is to attach my photos to my layout. I have decided to put the single dolphin down the bottom and sort of tuck him under the waves, and then the photo with the two dolphins, the larger photo, will be just tucked behind that slightly. I've mounted my journaling spots on some chipboard scraps, and I'm going to use my glue now to attach those so that they form a triangle on my layout. This was as far as I'd got with my thoughts on this layout, and when I looked at it, it looked too plain. There was too much white space. Not that I don't like white space, but it just didn't look finished. So I thought about cutting some smaller circles so that they looked like bubbles and just scattering them around. But then I had a thought that maybe I could use some sequins. I had a look in my stash and I found some sequins that were sort of a bluey greeny colour, and I think that the sequins sort of give the feel of bubbles, and I was very happy with that. So I just scattered some around and then used my pick-me-up tool and my glue to attach the sequins where they fell. So that was how the sequins got to be on there, and I'm quite happy with the sequins actually. They're not something that I use very often, so maybe I should start using them a bit more. So there we have my layout for today. I hope you've enjoyed watching my video. If you're not already a subscriber, I would love it if you would subscribe. Don't forget, there will be a link in the description box below to Off The Rails Scrapbooking to have a look at their challenge. So pop over, check it out, and they have prizes, so you may be the lucky winner for April. Once again, thanks for being here, and I hope you can join me for my next video.